Hello my friends and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 build guide. Hope you're all doing well. Today I'm going to cover how to build the best dagger-focused rogue in Baldur's Gate 3. This is Astarion's default build when you meet him, so of course we're using him as the example character, and this is, I think, an excellent lore-friendly build for Astarion, as well as for a main character. If you are using this for a main character, to have your main character be a dagger-wielding rogue, or affectionately referred to as a blender rogue, then you probably don't want to be a high elf, because there's not a lot of synergy between high elf and what we're doing. The best racial choices are, as always, wood elf for the bonus movement speed, drow for the once per day darkness is actually pretty interesting, githyanki for misty step, or halfling for advantage on stealth checks and the ability to reroll ones. Any of those will be pretty close to mechanically optimal. High Elf does get one interesting thing, which is proficiency in longswords, because in Baldur's Gate 3 there's actually several longswords that are finesse weapons, meaning that you can use your dexterity to deal damage with them. We will, though, get access to longsword proficiency elsewhere in the build, so while this is fairly useful in the early game, it will be replaced later as we level up. Rogues have several important advantages in Dungeons & Dragons, and the most important of this is that they are single attribute dependent, or SAD. Despite the abbreviation, that is a very good thing, because it means that we can focus our stat array on only the attributes that we care about. I guess technically they're double attribute dependent, but the important thing is that they pretty much only need dexterity to function. Most other characters are going to need a minimum of 3 attributes, whether that be for a caster class, you need one of your casting stats for your spells and save DCs, constitution for hit points, and dexterity for armor class and initiative. Rogues do damage based on their dexterity, so the only 2 attributes that they actually need any points in at all are dexterity and constitution, because you get damage, armor class, and initiative from your dexterity, and hit points from constitution. This means that when we're fixing Astarion's default stat build array, there's a lot of improvements that we can make, so let's do that now. And we are going to get rid of all of these extra bonuses, in the other skills that we don't particularly need, and take 14 in Wisdom. This is because Wisdom is the most important saving throw. Typically, the most dangerous effects are going to be targeting your dexterity, your constitution, or your wisdom saves, and rogues handily already get 2 of those 3 as really solid attributes, because we were able to put 16s in both of them, and so we put our remaining points in wisdom to ensure that we have a good wisdom save as well. These last few points are, I would say, fairly interchangeable. I personally like to put them in strength because it gives you some additional jump distance, which can be very useful on rogues. Carry weight is always nice to have, and there are some circumstances where you want to make strength checks to push an enemy or something, but for the most part, the remaining 4 points are up to you. For a main character, of course, you're going to want a few points in charisma so that you can take some dialogue skills. Rogues also, by default, get access to all of the best skills in the game, so your character background is less important for rogues than for other characters, but the natural one is also the best one. That's Urchin. It gives you access to Sleight of Hand and Stealth, which are, of course, the 2 most important skills for rogues to have. Overall, I like Astarion's default skill spread for the most part, although we don't really need investigation on him. Perception is good to have on everybody, and because we're taking 14 wisdom, this is actually pretty useful. Stealth and sleight of hand expertise is of course what you want to go with. Acrobatics and athletics are both very useful, so I would probably put my remaining point just in something else for flavor. If he's not your conversation user, you could leave it in investigation. If you intend to have him sometimes in conversations, you could put it in one of the conversation skills. He already gets deception, but in general, the last skill point doesn't matter that much. The other thing that rogues get at level 1 is they get access to sneak attack. How sneak attack works is you do an extra d6 of damage to an enemy once per turn, based on your rogue level. This increases at odd rogue levels, so you do 1d6 bonus damage at level 1, 2d6 bonus damage at level 3, 3d6 bonus damage at level 5, and so on. This means that we're pretty incentivized to, if we are splitting off from Rogue, do so at an odd level, which luckily synergizes well with the multiclass that we want to take. But before we do that, let's get moving so that we can get to our next level ups. One thing that's extremely important on this character, and on any character that is intending to use 2 weapons, and of course we're going to have 2 weapons equipped, whether that be 2 short sword and a dagger, or 2 daggers, is that you want to counterintuitively turn off this dual-wielding button. By default, if you have this on and you click attack on an enemy, it uses both your main hand and your offhand attack, eating your bonus action. You won't always want to use your bonus action for an offhand attack, especially because the most important thing for rogues is to land your sneak attack every single turn. You do that by having an enemy adjacent to an ally or having advantage against them, either by attacking from stealth or a couple other circumstances, knocking them prone. An excellent ally for a rogue is a Wolf Totem Barbarian, which just provides melee allies with advantage when adjacent to the same enemy. Extremely strong. And the one reason that we won't want to always use our bonus action for an offhand attack is that at level 2 Rogue, we get all of these cunning actions. This allows you to use disengage, dash, or hide as bonus actions. So rather than doing a small amount of damage, usually a d6 or a d4 with no, at this level, no attribute bonus or sneak attack on our offhand attack, we would much rather attack, disengage from the enemy, and then run away. This is the play pattern that you're going to see very often on your rogue, as you run up, you attack with your main hand. If it hits, you apply sneak attack, and then bonus action, disengage, and run away. If it doesn't hit, then you use your offhand attack in an attempt to apply sneak attack. As long as you're applying sneak attack consistently every turn, your damage output is going to be good, and that's a really strong advantage that a dual-wielding rogue has, even in the early game before you get other bonuses for dual-wielding. At rogue level 3, we get access to our subclass, and also a second d6 of sneak attack, so we're now doing 2d6 whenever we land a sneak attack. And the subclass that I recommend for this build is the Thief. The reason for this is, I just talked about how good bonus actions are. Well, Thief gets a second one. So now you have a main hand attack and 2 offhand attacks every round. At this current point, it is still mostly intended for your offhand attacks to apply sneak attack damage, not to be huge damage in and of themselves, because right now your offhand attacks are not applying the damage from your dexterity. But, starting at the next level, we are going to fix that. At level 4, we actually take a deviation from the build, and we are going to take a level of Fighter. The reason for this is that Fighter gives you access to a fighting style, allowing you to pick up 2 weapon fighting. So whenever we make an attack with our offhand attack, now it does our dexterity in damage. So now both our main hand attack and our offhand attack, for 3 attacks every round, are dealing full damage, as though they were any other character. This means that we, at level 4, have access to basically a whole extra attack, compared even to other characters that get early double attacks, like the Berserker Barbarian or the Gloomstalker Ranger. Those guys get access to 2 attacks conditionally. We, at level 4, get access to 3 fully powered attacks, because we have just as strong offhand attacks as we do main hand attacks. There are 2 choices for our 5th level. You can either take Fighter as your next level and gain access to Action Surge. This gives you a whole extra attack, of course, because it gives you an additional action. Or you can take level 4 Rogue to get a feat. I personally prefer to go to level 4 Rogue because getting access to an ability improvement, now that we're applying our dexterity on every attack, increasing our dexterity by 2 means an additional 3 damage a round, as well as extra AC, extra initiative, and extra chance to hit. Astarion also happens to have a bonus to hit himself, which makes him an excellent rogue because rogues really just want to hit with an attack in a round in order to apply your sneak attack. But since we're attacking so many times, we can use that extra ability to hit to apply our extra damage, dexterity to damage more and more frequently than most characters. To trigger this, you're going to need to have him either feed on your main character at night or use this bite attack on a humanoid, or I guess on any living creature, and then you gain this happy buff for the entire day. +1 to all attack rolls, saving throws, and skill checks is an incredibly powerful buff to get basically for free, and it means that Astarion is actually the most mechanically powerful character in the game, regardless of his character levels, regardless of his class levels. Even before you give him any class levels, he's better than all the other companions because of this ability. One thing to note is if you have this debuff on your main character from allowing Astarion to feed on them, you can remove it with a Lesser Restoration or Remove Curse spell to remove the debuff from this. So there's also more or less no downside to doing this. But, of course, if you don't want to let him feed on your main character, then you can just use this on a random living creature sometime during the day. If you're hiding, it doesn't deal damage and won't aggro NPCs, so you get this for free. Going into level 6, there are again 2 options. At this point, we can either continue down the path of Rogue in order to maximize our sneak attack damage dice, or continue down the path of Fighter, because that will allow us to reach extra attack sooner. And of course, extra attack in combination with Fighter's natural action surge allows you to apply more damage faster. I, at this point, think that you want to start leveling Fighter again, and then we will finish Rogue later in the build, but which order you level these in, I think, is more or less up to you. For this example, though, I'm going to level Fighter, so now with Action Surge, we have, when we use Action Surge, 4 attacks in a round. We're now also level 6, so it's very viable to have Haste from an ally, gaining up to 5 attacks in a round, which is, of course, extremely strong. When each of them applies your dexterity to damage, that's an extra 20 damage just from your dexterity, even ignoring the damage of your weapons. If you've watched a bunch of my previous builds, you will be somewhat surprised by the choice that we make here. I don't think that Battlemaster is a bad choice, because it's by far the best of the fighter subclasses, and will still have a ton of utility for this build, but in this particular case, because we're attacking so often, and because rogues have so much synergy with critical hits, you, I think, will benefit more strongly from taking Champion. The reason for this is twofold. One, whenever you critically hit, it doubles the damage dice of all of your attacks, and sneak attack dice are damage dice. So doubling the damage of all of your attacks is extremely strong. Anytime you can gain access to critical hits on Rogue, you double a very high burst damage off the start of the fight, and you can boost the chance of gaining critical hits because there's a lot of gear that will give you improved critical hit, and a lot of it is geared for rogues to use, so you can get this number to something like critting on a 16 or higher. When you are making attacks with advantage, you are almost, I think you're about 40% to roll a 16 or higher with advantage. Someone check my math on that. But that means that over the course of making your 4 or 5 attacks in a given round, you're basically guaranteed at least one critical, and very likely to receive more than that over the course of long fights. So Champion really synergizes with what rogues want to do. At fighter level 4, we get access to another feat, allowing us to upgrade our dexterity again. You might think you want a dual wielder on this character, but you are probably going to be using 2-weapon fighting mostly on light weapons anyways. If you have found one of the longswords that I talked about that you really want in your main hand for whatever reason, you can take dual wielder instead of your second 2 points of dexterity, but I definitely recommend taking dexterity because of how powerful it is to get to 20 dexterity. We're applying our dex to damage so often on this build that it will end up being extremely useful. Another thing to consider, and I should have mentioned this when I was talking about the stat spreads actually, is if you begin with 17 in dexterity, you can take the athlete feat instead of one of these ASIs, ability improvements, gaining the gaining a point in dexterity and still reaching 20, and then also increasing your jump distance by 50%. This will cost you a couple points in something else, like you would have 10 strength, maybe, or you would lose a couple points in wisdom, but you will end up with a higher jump distance, which can be very useful. So that's a build variation that I would consider as well. This is the reason we've been leveling up Fighter, because now we reach extra attack. This means every action we have, and we often get multiple actions because of Action Surge, at least once per short rest, gives us an additional attack. So now our core combo of the blender is going to be at least 4 main hand attacks and 2 offhand attacks, one from each bonus action, gaining an enormous amount of damage, applying plus 30 damage from our dexterity, as well as applying sneak attack dice. We do want to start raising those sneak attack dice, though, so as we level up, now that we're fighter level 5, this build is fairly feat independent, so we can skip getting... We only need to get 2 feats just to hit 20 dexterity, and we can go back to taking levels in Rogue. Here you get Uncanny Dodge, giving you the option to reduce damage by half. This build actually ends up fairly tanky, and we'll talk about that in a second, but this is a big component of that. You can reduce incoming damage by half, and you also get a decent amount of HP from the fighter levels, as well as medium armor proficiency. So I will show you that when I talk about gear in a moment, but this build actually ends up quite survivable for a rogue because of the fighter levels. Rogue level 6, you don't get anything in particular. You get expertise in a couple skills, in 2 more skills, but at this point you've probably got all of your skills where you want them. You probably just take athletics and acrobatics. Plus 13 acrobatics means you sure are not getting pushed anytime soon, and expertise in athletics, even with low strength, will allow you to push enemies very reliably, especially because you are more likely to push enemies when you sneak up on them, and this build has stealth expertise for a plus 13 stealth check as well, so you are extremely likely to be able to push any enemy into a pit if that's something that you want to do. Finally, at Rogue level 7, you get Evasion, which is really good against AoE spells, and again contributes to the significant tankiness of this build. You take only half damage from any spell that targets your dexterity, or 0 damage if you succeed on the save, and with 20 dexterity and dexterity save proficiency, you are very likely to pass saves against fireballs or anything else that checks your dex, so you are extremely likely to just take 0 damage if an enemy spell that targets your dexterity save is incoming. Putting it all together, in a typical round of combat, you are going to have 2 actions from between Action Surge and your normal action, 3 if you get a party member to cast haste on you, and then 2 offhand attacks, all for full damage, and you get to add 46 sneak attack damage once. You will also have pretty good critical hit chance thanks to your levels in Champion Fighter and thanks to our itemization. A couple items that are really worth mentioning on this character: anything that increases your critical hit chance, like this Shade Slayer cloak, reduces the number that you need to roll a critical hit. Also important is that you get medium armor proficiency on this build. So there's a few medium armors in the game that allow you to apply your full dexterity to your armor class, and with medium armor proficiency and your full dexterity, using, for example, this Yuan-Ti Scale Mail, we end up with 21 base AC, which is higher even than most characters in full plate and a shield, who get 20 base AC, 18 from the full plate and 2 from the shield, meaning that you actually have better armor class in most of the gear that you're going to be able to get pretty easily for this character than even the armor class focused builds that heavy armor users will be going. Additionally, any other items that are really good, of course you just want the best 2 light and finesse weapons that you can find. The Knife of the Undermountain King is one that you get relatively early that's extremely powerful, and then there's a few others that are really worth getting, but this one gives you a lot of extra options. Again, anything that increases your critical hit chance is really good, and because we're making so many attacks around, anything that increases the damage that your character does, like these Dark Justiciar gauntlets. With 6 or 8 attacks in a given round, this is going to add up to a ton of extra damage over the course of a single round of burst combat. Finally, I would be remiss if I didn't call out the Eversight ring. This allows you to gain blind immunity, meaning that if you are hiding in a darkness cast by, say, you as a drow or an ally spellcaster, or a fog cloud cast by an ally spellcaster, or something done by throwing firing an arrow of darkness, or throwing a bottle that creates a smoke cloud, you make yourself immune to blind. Enemies in this cloud will still be blinded, and so you will be able to attack them while obscured with advantage, triggering sneak attack and doubling the chance of gaining a critical hit, and they will have disadvantage on any return attacks. So this is an extremely powerful effect that's very good for any stealth-based character. Finally, I want to mention a couple build variations as well. I'm not going to do full walkthroughs for them, but I think they are worth mentioning. One is that instead of reaching Rogue level 7, you could stop at Rogue level 4 and take 3 levels of Ranger. For Hunter Ranger, I'm just going to quickly show you the feature that we want from that. Because if we take Hunter Ranger up to level 3... not going to bother picking anything in particular here. Not only do you get a second fighting style, allowing you to take defense or 2-weapon fighting, but you'll have one of second fighting style from fighter, so you'll be able to take defense, gaining an additional AC, putting your base AC up to 22. At Ranger level 3, you can take either the Gloomstalker class for an additional attack in the first round of combat, as well as an initiative bonus, super powerful, or the Hunter subclass, which gives you access to Colossus Slayer for an additional D8 of damage on your second attack in a round. Since you're likely to critically hit very often, this is pretty good, but because this is only once per turn, I think you are much more likely to want Gloomstalker. Yes, this is only once per combat as opposed to once per turn, but you are extremely powerful at killing enemies early on in combat. You really want to be one-shotting enemies and then running away, and the additional Gloomstalker attack, which is a main hand attack, will allow you to do that very effectively. This also gives you Dark Vision, which is pretty useful for a stealth-based character, and the ability to become invisible, which is a good way to gain advantage on an attack. The Dread Ambusher bonus action hide is redundant with the Rogue's bonus action hide, so you don't gain any advantage from that. But the Dread Ambusher feature, giving you a whole extra attack on the opening round of combat, faster movement speed, and a +3 bonus to initiative, means you'll basically always win initiative with +8 from between your dexterity and your Dread Ambusher bonus, and then be able to one-shot an enemy off the opening round of combat by stabbing them with daggers until they fall over. Alright, my friends, I hope that you've enjoyed this look at an Astarion dagger-based build, and as always, if you have, do please feel free to leave a comment down below, because I both enjoy reading them and it helps out a ton with the algorithm. Like the video, and you can subscribe to my channel for more of this and other strategy game content. Cheers, my friends. I'll catch you next time.